All right. It is November 1st. So happy November, everyone. This is the Gateway API meeting. And we've got a few things to go through. I wanted to highlight a couple upcoming topics. Both Shane and Jeff are hoping to be able to talk about the upcoming gaps, one for route matching, L4 route matching, destination IP, port, and anything else we might think of. And similarly, route inclusion and delegation, hoping we can get to those in a couple weeks. So I just kind of penciled those in as November 15. Obviously, feel free to change them as the date gets closer. But that's what we have right now for coming up topics. We also have lots to get through today. And I'm not sure. Yeah, it looks like Youngmin, you're on this call. You had started a discussion about metadata matching for Gateway API. Maybe you can provide a bit of background on what you're hoping to get out of this.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So hi, everyone. My name is Yang Minzhu. So this is actually my first time joining the Gateway API community meeting. So I'm a software engineer working on Istio. And so I opened this specific feature request for discussions in the Gateway API community to see if we may need and have a more general metadata matching API that is like designing the gateway label so that it can be used to match against various different things in the routing stage. One very common use case that I have seen in many Istio customers asking for, and also supported in many other products like Nginx, Kong, HA Proxy, Envoy, and the Glue Edge, is the routing based on JWT claim. The JWT is a very common way for end user validation. It is a token usually passed in the HTTP header and validated in the server side. Once it is validated, it contains a kind of like a JSON object containing a lot of claims representing the validated end user. And we often want to route that request to different backend based on the different claims in that token. For example, if you have some developers, they have a high privilege JWT token, they can use that JWT token to route the request to a development backend. And for the normal user and for other people, they will not have that token, and then they will be routed to the default production backend. I put some very early design ideas here just to start a discussion. Of course, they are not finalized. It's not it's not a formal proposal. Just want to collect feedback from the community to see what it might look like in the future. One way to do this is potentially we reuse the header field. Basically, we reserve some special header name that can be used to match various metadata things. To distinguish it from the normal real header, we could technically prefix it with some invalid character. Actually, the dollar character shown in the GitHub issue is probably not a good example because that is actually an allowed HTTP header, but we can use some other prefix like the X character so that it will never be used as a real HTTP header. And then the remaining part is just reusing the header matcher that is already there to match against the validated JWT claim. And we can use a reserved key to specify that this item is matching to the JWT claim. For example, the request.auth claims. Once again, that is just an example. Nothing is finalized here. The second kind of the design idea is that we have a dedicated field that is added in the matcher field that is used specifically for those metadata matcher things. the detail API is up to discussion, but the general idea is it will have something like a kind of a key for referring like what kind of metadata you are going to match, and then a value that is the value you are expecting from that data structure, and also some other accessory like fields to help you to look up probably a property in that like data structure in that metadata. Those are the two like kind of the high level, I think, design ideas. There are already many feedbacks in the issue. I think it seems like most people probably prefer like a dedicated field other than reusing the header field to like reduce like a confusing, and also probably give us like a more flexibility in the future if we have more like a different kind of metadata we want to support. So that's kind of the introduction and of this feature request. Any comments or questions so far?
Yeah, thanks for raising this. I'll hand it off if anyone has questions, but I just wanted to thank you for adding all these. Anytime I see an issue which already shows how different implementations use or support this kind of feature, it's helpful because these are obviously implementations we're trying to support, or at least be portable with. So that's really helpful. I can see this, based on your introduction to this and reading through this and the discussion below it, it does seem like this is a fairly broadly supported concept, but we have to be very careful with anything like this, because it's very easy for this to easily balloon out of scope, because there's a lot of closely related but slightly different topics here that all, when you combine them all together, can result in a very large project, API, whatever. So I think if we can be very focused on this particular use case, or whatever particular use case we're trying to enable, that could be helpful, which I think you are. And then the other thing that I would add here is that this, and I think I added it in the discussion below, this is something that, again, that's slightly unrelated, so I'm trying not to go too far against what I just said, but this shows that we currently don't have a matching extension mechanism. I'm not sure that's the correct approach here, but it does, if we were to run into some kind of route matching mechanism that was more extended and further, less broadly supported, then I can see how some kind of extension mechanism here could be really useful to enable this kind of experimentation. But this particular thing does seem to be fairly broadly supported. So anyways, that's a lot of nothing, but I'll hand it off if anyone has additional thoughts they want to add here.
Yeah, I wanted to say thanks for addressing that concern I had about map string. Yeah, I think I feel pretty strongly about that one, that we've got to avoid all things like that, but you're already doing that, so thanks for just clarifying that, Youngwin. But I think, I definitely support having something that does make sense to be able to route on drop token claims. I think the thing that I would worry about with this is that the design sketch you've got there makes sense, but I feel like the magic name feels like a bit of a, smells a little bit, it feels a little funky. It feels like having something that would more cleanly define the name in a field rather than in like a magic string in a name is a better design practice. One of the things I've been pushing for the I've been thinking about conformance a lot, and one of the things I've been trying to think of is like, how would we test this? How would we ensure that there's a specific way to do this and that we can write a conformance test against it? And how would we bound the scope so that you don't have to write conformance tests for like all possible combinations of metadata? And I think the answer to that in my mind is something like having something where you can say, the type, the match, that it's an exact match and it's an auth type metadata, and or it's we specify that it's a JOT metadata, and then you supply the key and the value or something like that, so that then we can say, okay, for JOT tokens that we do this mechanism that allows us to add like any generic type of metadata, but we're going to add sort of types one by one at extended conformance. And then if implementations want to play around with this, they can use an implementation specific extra version that they then play around with, and then they can talk about promoting that into extended by adding a series of tests for the extended thing. That feels to me like the point of having implementation specific to extended to core conformance. This doesn't feel like it'll ever be core conformance, but to me, but having it be that work that way, and having something where we can say, okay, this specific type of match in the metadata field is extended conformance, but anything else is implementation specific. That then allows us to solve the sort of the how do we keep the API surface bounded. Sorry, I've talked a lot.
Yeah, I agree with everything there. Those are great points. And Youngman, I think I understood this correctly, but I want to be clear. This is the examples you're giving are for JOT matching, but you're really looking for something like broader in scope than JOT matching. You're looking for metadata matching as a whole. Is that okay?
Yes. Yes. A little bit more about this is that even though the like immediate like a user request like we have seen is for this JOT claim matching, but I imagine it will be needed for other types of metadata that is not like in the format of JOT token, and it may have some other formats. So I'm just thinking ideally like in the gateway API level, so we completely decouple this from other things like the validation of that like information if that is validated, and also we decouple this from those like it's a file format that is being sent over the network, and in the gateway level we specifically like have the scope of like a API for matching that metadata. After that is like decoded or validated or whatever operation that is necessarily done for that thing. So in this level, if we can like somehow express that metadata in like a kind of a unified or general data structure, for example, if it can be expressed in like a JSON object, the real like the matching semantics we will need in most cases, I guess, it is just to look up a property in that JSON object and then compare it with a value. That simple like semantics probably satisfy maybe 19% use cases. And JOT claim is just like one example. Like after it is validated or decoded, its information is kind of like expressed in that JSON object, and then we just need to match like one field in that object to another value. So like imagine if you have another metadata that you want to match in the future. Let's say we want to match against the peer certificate, because like there are also many users, they are using client-side certificate for validating and authenticating with the gateway API. And that peer certificate information can also be expressed very likely like in like a JSON object. For example, you may have a field representing the principal of that certificate, and then you can use this like a general gateway API to match against that field. The only like a thing you need to like specify explicitly in the gateway API is probably to say like which type of metadata you want to match, and the remaining part will be reused. I think that's hopefully I think that will be like useful for other metadata, so that we don't need to like introduce another field like each time for a new data or for a new metadata.
I think that's good clarification, and this is making me think of. I think Nick, you had the suggestion earlier when you were talking something along the lines of instead of say an exact type or something like that, where you're talking about an exact name match, what you might have is this is a kind of JWT match, and it's a JOT match. This is a clearly understood kind of match, and this is what this means in the extended scope of the API. But then we potentially have room, like we've done elsewhere in Gateway API, of vendor prefixed values there too. Of this is a proprietary foo match for this other concept that is not as broadly understood in Gateway API. So we have these core concepts, and we have a consistent way to match JOT across every implementation. But then we have room for extension here. I don't know. I'm interested in what others think here, but and I may have misunderstood what you were saying, Nick. So correct me if I'm.
Yeah. So I think that is exactly what I was saying. I definitely would support what you're talking about, Young, and having the mechanism be present. But I think the thing that's really important that we do for the Gateway API is be very clear about what things are like supported at what level. And so like something like JOT is like a very, as you say, it's a pretty common use case. Lots of people want that. It's pretty well understood, and so it makes sense that it would either start out in extended or make its way to extended support very quickly. But if the mechanism that we have lets you define then arbitrary extra things, so then you can, if you want to be able to do, and I think if the API looks something like the type of match, a key, a value, and like a predicate on what sort of match it is, then that gives you, it's a very big scope for customizing and making things custom. But if we say, okay, the type is what sets how well it should be supported, so that and that if that type is allowed to be a domain prefix string, then that means that if say you want to experiment with a certificate certificate key value matching, then you can do myimplementation.io/certificate or something like that. And then that means that then you can prototype something, you can try it out, you can have your users try it. And then if it works really well and you think it's a common enough use case, then you can bring it back to the Gateway API and say, okay, here's the code that I've done, here's the implementation I've done for myimplementation.io/certificate. I think that there's broad enough use of it that we can bring it back and make it extended support in the Gateway API. Part of that process, I think we haven't defined this process yet, but in my mind, part of that process says, that the maintainers of the Gateway API review that the implementation and the associated conformance tests that you would use to test that the implementation behaves to say it was. And then if you do that, then it comes into extended, and then it's up to other implementations whether or not they pick up that extended support. That feels like the flow that we're aiming for with building out new features in one implementation and being able to bring them to other implementations. Because again, I've said this in a number of ways, but I want to try and say it every meeting so that we all make sure we agree, is that one of the primary aims of the Gateway API project is to make sure that you can move routes safely between implementations as long as both implementations support the same set of features. And so if everybody supports JOT, if the two implementations that you're trying to move between support JOT matching, like JOT claim matching, and the feature is defined in a certain way and has conformance tests that make sure that both of those implementations are conformant, you should be able to just pick up a route and move it between gateways without any problems. Is that always going to be viable? No, because of other reasons, but that's what the API should be focused on, I think.
I see.
Cool. Yeah, no, great summary. I agree. And I guess, well, actually, let me hold off. Does anyone else have any feedback on this one before I had some final words, thoughts?
At some point, it might be helpful to sort of experiment this with the alpha fields that we have been discussing about. Not at this point, but at some point. So this is like a good candidate for it.
I'm glad you brought that up. I've been thinking about how do
I be
actually...
careful, not alpha, experimental.
Yes, experimental. Yes. I've been thinking to myself about the experimental gap, which we'll get to later today. how I actually implement that. And to do that, we really need an experimental field to test it with. So whoever can race to the first experimental field, this seems like a great candidate. Whatever it is, that'll be fun. So, okay, I think we have at least enough interest to work towards a proposal on this. It seems like the direction that Nick was describing here lines up with what others are thinking. Youngmin, I can chat with you offline about how we can get a proposal out there, but maybe we'll start with a doc that kind of builds from this issue and eventually move to a gap. Cool. All right. Well, yeah, thanks for bringing this. Great. Awesome. All right, I'll move on to the next one. And that is, release plan. So this is really just, last week I was looking at the release plan and timeline proposal. It's not a plan, whatever it is. And I was trying to figure out what is the next step for a doc like this? Like we've been struggling, I've been struggling at least with, does everything become a gap? Does every doc we ever create turn into a gap if it's something that we agree to? Or are there some things that go from doc to like built-in documentation, issue, discussion? This is one that's not really formal. It's just hey, by the way, this is something we're thinking about doing in an approximate timeline for when we're thinking about doing it. It's not, it's nothing really more formal than that in my mind. So I'm not sure if it belongs anywhere other than the doc that it currently exists in. And if it does, if community thinks it belongs as a gap, a doc, on the doc's website as an issue or as discussion. Does anyone have a strong opinion on where this kind of content should live?
I do, but I want other people to have a shout first.
Why not a gap, Rob?
It's
made gap to be basically lightweight, so
it is.
I'm
it
assuming
is
if you
very
can cut and
lightweight.
paste it, then it should be sufficient.
Yes. What I'm concerned about is that if we have a gap for everything, we may lose some we may lose some form of discoverability. Like so far, gaps are really truly enhancement proposals. They are referring to not necessarily often API changes, but at least API concepts. This is more of a procedural thing to me in my mind. It's not something that affects the API itself. It's not going to change the API. It's just, here's a thing we're planning on doing. And I haven't thought of gaps as being procedural yet. They can be whatever we want them to be, but yeah.
For what it's worth, discussions have the concept of an announcement.
Right.
Yeah, so
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion. I do think that it needs to be checked in as part of the website somewhere.
Yeah, I was going to say, it feels like this is very much a time limited announcement of some sort. And my thought was, well, we have a blog. That's a time limited announcement. Maybe that's as safe a place as any to be like, okay, we're going to publish a blog saying this is the current plan as of the date that this blog was published. For the most up-to-date version of this plan, please see somewhere else, or this plan may change or something like that. But that way, a blog post has the advantage it has a very definite published date. If we were to put this in as a gap or something like that, we'd have to have a thing at the top to say this was the plan as of this date. If you're looking at this after this date, then you should really consider, maybe it's been updated. You might have to go somewhere else to look. But a blog post kind of has a built-in expiration or staleness marker or something like that by virtue of the fact that it was published on a specific date.
That's a good point. Maybe that's I hadn't actually thought of a blog post, but that's a good way to incorporate it into the website with, as you're saying, a very clear published date, which is important for this. I wonder if we could maybe a blog post pointing to a discussion, something like that that's easy to update with more up-to-date timeline, whatever, as we go. I don't know.
I like the sound of that. I feel like Shane would +1 us using discussions again. This is me being cheeky, Shane.
I like discussions.
Yeah, I want to use them more. So this is
Agreed.
as
I
good a
did
reason
too.
as
I
any.
did too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Cool.
like that idea, actually.
Okay. I'll work on that. Great. The last bit I have here is just in no particular order, PR and issue triage. I think the entirety of PRs we've got it in the past week or so are GEP related. So thanks everyone. The first one, let me hand it over to Nick. I think this is almost done. There was just a question from James at the end. Unless I'm missing any other discussion points on this.
Yeah, I think James isn't here today. So, but I think James was sort of saying why should we do profiles? And I think I put a bit of a response there, but just to say it again, in my mind, the profiles are the way that we're going to. This is a really big API that it is almost that most implementations will not support all of. And in my mind, profiles are a way to subdivide the functionality and say, for this set of functionality, if you support some of this, you almost certainly want to support all of it. And so we're going to carve that off and say this is a profile. And if you support this profile, then you should be able to move between them. At its heart, a profile for conformance is literally just a checklist of all of the features that everything needs to support. And on top, and those features are really what tests need to pass. At its heart, a conformance profile is syntactic sugar for a certain set of conformance tests that have to pass for your implementation. But there's a certain set of ones that are in core support that everybody who does a certain thing is going to have to pass. And I think there's some value in having a very simple syntactic sugar for that matches like how we talk about these things anyway. The examples I've given in the document are layer 4 and layer 7. Although names could.
Yeah, no, so I read through this and I was starting a response and then I lost track of time, but what my response was going to be is I see what James is saying is that in that, fundamentally we want to support, an implementation wants to say, I support these particular route types. And that might not always fit, squarely in terms of one single conformance profile or the other, like there may be, I support TCP route, but not UDP route, whatever it is, right? Whatever it is. Or I don't support TLS route. I don't know. What it feels like we need, and there may be space for this, is conformance profiles are a useful kind of shortcut, a useful way of describing the 95% of implementations that are going to fit into this bucket of, hey, I am a L7 proxy, or I forget what we call that, but that, that profile. Whereas we need to have some room for the 5% or whatever implementations out there that don't cleanly fit into one of those buckets. They either do a little bit more or a little bit less. And so maybe there's room kind of as an extension to this to say, if you don't fall into a conformance profile, here's how you can programmatically describe, the resources you support or something like that. I'm not sure. That's just thinking off the cuff here.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, dog. Okay. I think that it makes sense. It makes sense to define this in terms of like the per object is like the intermediate step between profile and like field level support. I think at its heart, all of this comes down to field level tests that will need to be run. And then you can bundle those up into CID level tests that comprise a set of field level tests, and then you can bundle those up into conformance profiles that are like a set of CIDs. And so it probably makes sense to update this document to make that clearer, to make clear that there's a there's sort of a hierarchy here, and that we can provide syntactic sugar in the form of a conformance profile. And all that is saying the layer 7 conformance profile is gateway class, reference policy, HTTP route, TLS route. But if you want to support those objects plus your own routes, or you only want to support HTTP route and not TLS route, but sure, if you wanted to do that, that's fine. You can do the conformance just by specifying that you support just those objects. And if you wanted to do HTTP route, TLS route, and TCP route, but not UDP route, then you can do that just by specifying like your own custom conformance profile in this manner. So yeah, I think that is fair feedback that I'll take. The conformance profiles are syntactic sugar, but we should make sure that the levels of syntactic specificity that you want are available to you as an implementer. That comes back to what I kind of took out of this that I had in the original document was thinking a little bit more about how we will programmatically expose that information. There needs to be a way we need to be able to have a test suite that you can point at something that has a way to describe to the test suite what tests should be run. Ideally my initial proposal for that is that it should be status on the gateway class, but I don't think that's the be all and end all. There could be other ways to do this that are better, but I think that it should be a hard requirement that there is some automatable way for an implementation to be able to specify these are the tests, this is the conformance that I am shooting for, and these are the tests that should be run. And the test harness that we end up with should be able to take that and then take a place to connect to or a gateway object to look at and be able to figure out from there how to run its tests and what tests to run and to be able to give you a result at the end. I think we want to end up with the same sort of thing as you do with the official K8s conformance, where you run, there's a specific Sonobuoy set of command line flags that you pass to it, and then it gives you a test output file that you then PR into a specific repo that then is reviewed by those repo owners, and they give the thumbs up and merge it in, and then that says that thumbs up and merge in is we are conformant for this specific Kubernetes version. The corollary to that is that the conformance has to be versioned. It has to be versioned by the bundle version, probably, but it has to be versioned by some version of that. Basically, you can only be conformant to a specific version of the gateway API. You can't just be, conformant to latest or something like that. Like whatever your conformance is, it has to have the caveat that it's a specific version. And the tests and stuff, then that implies that when we do the versioning, that the conformance tests and the test harness will be bundled as part of the overall gateway API version bundle.
Yeah, I think I've been thinking too about what you're describing there of how you write conformance tests against any of this, right? And I think that's a good point. We want this to be something that can be programmatically understood by conformance tests, like you're saying. The simplest way I can think to write a conformance test is to say, this is a test. It requires an implementation that supports gateway, HTTP route, and gateway class. These are the resources that my specific test, and you probably don't need to write gateway class because I'd assume it's inferred. Whatever it is, right? But these are the things that my test tests, and then you just kind of run with that. So it seems like it's almost that lower level. Whereas what conformance profiles seem most useful for, and this may be me missing the boat on this, but when I think of a conformance profile, it's a very useful way to describe to users of gateway API that if you're looking for an L7 proxy, here are your implementations. If you're looking for an L4, whatever, here are your implementations. So you can kind of group things in very well known and defined buckets. And maybe there's an other category, I don't know. Whereas, when I think of something that will be useful for writing conformance tests, that's kind of like this resource is supported or it isn't, is a fairly easy thing to understand programmatically, running a test. I don't know. So, yeah.
I tend to feel a little bit more towards James's point of view. I think doing something like, saying like on the CRDs, saying you support like HTTP route, and you could have levels of support. So you could, the support could be core, meaning you support, obviously just core, or it could be core and extended, meaning you support all of extended, or if you only support like some of extended, it could be core plus. So it'd just be like a string of possible values, right? Or a string of keywords, right? Core, extended, plus, I don't know. So, but it would make it fairly easy to look at the capabilities you need, and at a high level, see if they're there. One of the issues I think I see with the profiles is trying to agree what should be in a profile. Which extended features of HTTP route should be in profile foo or in profile bar. We're all going to see differences in what we think is kind of should be required in a certain conformance level, and that's part of the challenge I see in this.
Yeah, I think that's 100% fair. I think maybe I didn't do a good job of making it clear that in my mind, the conformance profiles are only ever around what we class as core conformance. So a conformance profile is like, I support, effectively conformance profile is syntactic sugar for, I support gateway class, reference policy, HTTP route, TLS route, and the conformance profile may only mandate that you support the core supported fields for each of those types. And then extended is a whole different beast, because it is expected that implementations will support, it's sort of an expected use case that you won't support all extended features that we have available in any particular resource. So for HTTP route, you may not support you probably won't support all of the extended fields. And there needs to be a very detailed way for you to lay out exactly what extended fields you do support. And I guess, as I said, I never intended that the extended fields be included in there. That in my mind, the conformance profiles are literally syntactic sugar for, I support core conformance for the following set of resources. And that's it. That's all they are. And that not that it does not include extended support. I think extended support is too complicated to be able to include in any profile like that.
To me, that actually makes the profiles even less valuable. Core is core. You have to support core. I mean,
yeah. I think literally all the conformance profiles is like, so I probably should just update this to make conformance profiles less of a thing. They are syntactic sugar. They are how we're probably going to end up talking about these things anyway. Like Contour is a layer 7 ingress controller, right? Like it does. So but the thing that is implied from that is it doesn't do TCP route or UDP route. But some implementations are like your metal LBs or something like that, then probably not going to do the layer 7 stuff. They probably won't do HTTP route or TLS route. And there's going to be, I think, a large amount of commonality between lots of implementations that do mainly layer 4 stuff or mainly layer 7 stuff. And really all that is just a shorthand way of talking about all of this stuff. But maybe what I've done here is emphasize the shorthand way stuff, not the fact that this is not, the shorthand method is not like the be all and end all of the conformance process. And I think I've probably done a poor job of communicating that. And so I don't think the conformance profiles at the end of the day are a way to shortcut. You need to say every time that you specify what your thing does that, hi, I have Contour, and Contour supports gateway class, HTTP route, and TLS route, but not TCP route and UDP route. Right, I think it's much quicker to be able to say, Contour is a layer 7 ingress control, a layer 7 gateway API implementation. That's all. It's just a convenience thing. But I agree that what I should be doing in this thing is specifying this in terms of the supported resources and being more clear about the core and extended on those resources. And then at the end saying, hey, conformance profiles I'm proposing conformance profiles be a syntactic sugar way of gathering up a common set of these things and talking about them. Do we need conformance profiles? No. Do we need conformance on a per object basis? Absolutely. Does that make more sense?
It makes sense. I still don't really agree.
Okay, so you think that we should just not have any syntactic sugar, and every time we talk about what our thing does, we should just say, these are the resources it supports, and that's it.
I think have it at the level that James talks about as far as the CRDs, supporting HTTP route, supporting TLS route, UDP route, whatever. That's a great way to give a consumer the kind of a top end view of what your product supports. But once you start getting beyond that, and that's some of the things that are going to be important are going to be the extended functionality. And so to see what does this implementation or that implementation support what I need specifically, it's not going to be the core functionality, it's going to be the extended, and it's going to be a different mix for every person.
So this is where, again, like in my mind, that's where the machine parsable version of the conformance information is the most key thing, right? The machine parsable version of the conformance information basically is your column in the checkbox matrix that people always do when they're doing a comparison between different implementations, right? Like it allows you to programmatically specify which ones are ticks and which are crosses for you, right? Like, and that's, so everyone's going to have like the core ones at the top for like, but the problem is that, and what that means though is that for every, that thing is the source of truth, right? And the problem is that because of the fact that we have the extended support dimension, that means that you've got like 3 or 4 dimensions in which you need to compare implementations, right? Like you need to compare like what CRDs they support, and then for each CRD, like which extended fields they support. And so there's no real way that you can build an easy comparison for that. But and that's why I was talking about like if you're a person who doesn't know anything about the Gateway API and want to be like, I want to be able to do TLS, like I wanted to be able to do some TLS functionality, like you then need to go off and learn all about how the API works in order to learn the question that you need to ask the mechanical parsing thing to know which one does what the thing you want is, right? There's no, and all I'm saying is that the conformance profiles thing is literally just a syntactic tool to help people understand which implementation that they should even consider looking at, because but it's not. And like, again, you're right. I should just probably not talk about this and let this evolve, and then we will end up talking about it later. Like that's what I think will happen, is that we will end up putting things into rough buckets, and we will end up talking about things in that most people who support HTTP route are probably going to support TLS route, and that's what the conformance profiles discussion was about. It's probably not worth even this level of discussion, so it's probably worth just taking it out.
I think what you're both saying is similar, and I could be wrong here, but what I'm hearing is that conformance profiles are entirely a concept to enable to simplify users' understanding of implementations of this API, right? To understand, oh, these are the kinds of things that are built with this API. There are some tools out there that do L7 load balancing. There are different tools out there that do L4 load balancing. And that's like your high level introduction. These are the kinds of things that are possible. This is not meant to be a machine parsable concept, if I'm understanding correctly. It's meant to be a way of describing similar implementations. And then each implementation is very welcome to, and likely should have that kind of more detailed thing of, we support these specific resources and these specific features on those resources. But that's like kind of your step 2. I'm digging further into it now that I know you're in this category. So the profiles you're describing feel more like ways to categorize implementations that aren't necessarily as useful for writing conformance tests, but they're very useful for a user understanding implementations of the API and where they fall. Does that seem accurate?
Yes.
Cool. And does that seem valuable to you, Jeff? Or is that?
Yeah, I think that to me, it's just that it's, again, if you start breaking it down into what is in a particular conformance profile, what is that going to be? And start to get into the issue of, well, if it's, what if it's something, there's some aspect of it I don't want to support, but I'm 90% there, then I'm quote unquote not conformant, even though I've got, very likely have everything that a user might need. So I just think doing it at the high level of the CRDs gets the user in the general ballpark, and then it's going to have to be, going down into the details, depending on what they're going to need to do. It's kind of like I'm trying to think, what is it? The capabilities codes and CPUs. You have, MMX or the different things that a specific family or generation of a processor can do. Extended instructions. That's kind of where you have to look at the specific ones you need, and that's what I think that the detailed conformance tests come in. I'm going to have to see if I need to use HTTP header routing, I need to see if the product does support that specific type of routing.
Maybe what's confusing this here is, or Nick, you were going to say something, so go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think even in the sort of the, which I agree is not a great example, but like even in the case of like CPU capabilities, like you still have broad families like AMD or Intel, right? Like, or, AMD 64 versus, x86. And that, I guess, in my mind, conformance profiles are that broader bucket, right? Like, it's not talking about it's not really, it's making some representation that like, it's just, hey, this is focused on layer 7, or this is focused on layer 4. And it probably, if you want, so that it means that the people who are doing layer 4 stuff can be like, look, if you're interested in doing HTTP route, don't even, like, we're not for you. Like, we're not, don't bother coming and looking into our thing. It's not for us. It's not for you. It's a very much a high level classifier. As I said before, I think that it has sort of, it's not, you're right in that it's not useful at this time. It's probably better to let that sort of conversation arise by itself, based on the fact that, and if we are going to have profiles, we build them later based on what implementations tend to do later. Like, I suspect that there will be a layer 7 and a layer 4 one, but maybe it's better not to enshrine that right now and make that a thing that people need to target, and just be like, okay, we'll target the conformance ones now. Like, I would be like absolutely gobsmacked if we don't end up with like a whole bunch of implementations that support gateway class reference policy, HTTP route, and TLS route, and not TCP route, UDP route, right? Like, or some they'll support like only the barest capabilities of TCP route, UDP route, or something like that. But, and so, that's what I meant by sort of conformance profiles. In my mind, were intended to be composable, so that you could say, look, I support both, or I support some custom thing that's not a conformance profile. But again, I think that I've probably lent too hard on that, because that was how it made sense in my brain. But it does make sense, as you say, to specify for the spec, to specify this in terms of the object that you were talking about. And then conformance profiles is a thing that arises later if we need it. So does that make more sense, Jeff? That if you...
Yeah, I guess I'm almost saying, and I'll drop it after this, and this is just my view. I guess I'm thinking more of like conformance profile almost is, but you've got that by default if by saying which CRDs you support. So do you support the HTTP route? Do you support the TCP route? And that, if I don't support HTTP route, then obviously I'm not at layer 7, right? So I guess that's all. But this is just my view, and I know there's others that have different views. So we spent plenty of time on this. I'll shut up at this point.
No, I think the feedback is quite fair. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to rework this doc to not lean so heavily on it, to be like, okay, conformance is defined by the objects you support, and then leave the conformance profiles discussion out of it, and we can come back around to it later if it turns out to be useful to have a shortcut. That if it's annoying to have to specify the exact CRDs that you support every time, then we can come around and fix that later. But it's probably better now to leave this aside, and to let this be a thing that we generate over time rather than mandating it up front. That's fine. I think that's completely fair feedback.
That makes sense. And I do think, like you're saying, we will naturally get to that point where we'll have implementations that fall into different buckets, and we'll want ways to describe them that aren't, this many words. With that, and I think what you're focusing on now is the most important part of this, which is just when we trying to make sense of when we say something is core conformant on TCP route and you're an L7 proxy, how you make sense of that, because we don't have any answer to that in docs and GEP and anything. It's just kind of assumed that you can choose to not support TCP route, but we haven't said that. And so this still has a lot of value. Yeah. Okay, well, yeah, good discussion. I think we can keep on moving from this one. Let me move on to this versioning one. I have some follow-up on this to do. Thanks for the feedback on this one, Nick. I think you had good suggestions on adding examples here, but I just want to throw this out here. I think I only made this PR Friday-ish, maybe Thursday, I don't know. Is there any, does anyone have any hesitation about this one? This is a gap that started as a doc that we covered at least last week, if not weeks before. But this is really talking about, well, there's more content in here, but I think the most novel content in here is that of the experimental fields and how we plan on supporting that. So if anyone hasn't had a chance to look at this and has strong feelings about this, definitely let me know. Otherwise, I'll just work on the feedback I have here and move on from that.
Yeah, I'll take a look at this tomorrow.
Okay, cool. Cool. Yeah, there are some other things that are worth going through, like a role requirement section. I think we've looked through this in doc form before already, but just what we expect of API authors, implementers, etc. I hope this is straightforward, but good to have a good discussion here. Okay, so that's GAP 922. The next one is going way back in time. This is from before V1 Alpha 2. So I would imagine that in most people's mind, this is a relatively, you have to go back and pull it out of your memory here. But essentially what this, Harry already added some basic request redirect support. One of the things that was missing from that was path redirect support. And there was also no rewrite support. So this kind of bundles path redirect and rewrites in a single gap. They're similar but different concepts. This suggests that, hey, we're going to start with a path redirect that is based on the match value. This is something that I believe, well, you've probably seen this portability section down here, but I show how this is implementable by a variety of implementations. This is not an exhaustive list, but this is just a set that I looked at. And then, yeah, that's path redirects. There was some questions there. There are some suggestions in the GAP PR review to rename this to make it clear that this is actually based on the path. So instead of just prefix, it would be path match prefix, basically, because you're replacing, and also to clean up this example. But in this example here, this would replace slash. So basically nothing with a prefix of /var. I really need a clearer example here, but that is what I'm suggesting for path redirect here. Has anyone looked at this recently, or does anyone have feedback after having seen this maybe for the first time in a while? Does this line up with what you were thinking a path redirect might look like? Going to take silence. Oh, go ahead.
There was a PR that was that PR merged? I remember like a PR having like discussions around confusing names, I guess.
No, that is this PR. I need to update the naming here, but yes, the name is quite confusing right now. The suggestion that I'm planning on going with is, I think, path match prefix instead of just prefix, and using a better example. But yes, there is confusing naming here.
Yeah, it's mostly like I'll take a look again. It has been a while, like
Yeah.
you said, but yeah, it was mostly like those sort of more cosmetic issues. Otherwise, this seemed fine to me.
Okay.
Yeah, much the same for me. I'll take another look as well.
Okay, great. And then rewrites are very similar in concept to what we already have. It's just a new kind of filter. Instead of request redirect, it's request rewrite. And yeah, I don't want to go through, we're almost at time here, so I don't have enough time to run through every detail here, but just if you have time to take a look at this gap, that would be appreciated. I am hoping to get this back in to our next release. Hopefully that's beta. And of course, if that is, this would also be a thing that would be guarded by experimental fields. So another potential use case for experimental fields. Yeah, that's what I have there. That's gap 726. If you have time to take a look, and I think we're out of time for gRPC route, but Harry created a tracking issue. Thank you for just to see who's interested in gRPC route. You know, interested in any kind of discussion here or any kind of interest. It looks like there's at least some. But again, this is kind of a longer term thing just to gauge interest. Yeah, I think that's all. Any last comments, thoughts from anyone that we should discuss? Cool. All right, well, thanks everyone. Have a good rest of your week. See ya.